The small town of Clearwater was known for its slow pace and tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and big events, like weddings, were the talk of the town for weeks. It wasn't often that something truly exciting or unexpected happened in Clearwater, so when Jake and Emma announced their wedding, it was the biggest thing to hit the town in years. Jake was the local mechanic, known for his rugged charm and kind-hearted nature, while Emma, his bride-to-be, worked at the small bakery down the street. She was sweet, always with a smile, and the perfect match for Jake, or so it seemed. Their love story had captured the hearts of the town, a classic tale of childhood sweethearts who grew up together, their relationship blooming with age and time. The wedding day was set for a sunny Saturday in June, and as the date approached, the entire town buzzed with excitement. People flocked to the church, some for the ceremony, others for the chance to gossip and get the best view of the wedding of the year. The local diner was abuzz with speculation about the cake, the flowers, and, of course, the guests. Even the children in the town couldn't wait for the day to come, knowing that there would be free cake and a chance to dress up. Amid all this excitement was Sam, a 10-year-old boy who was related to both the bride and groom but was a quiet, often overlooked figure. Sam's family lived on the outskirts of town, in a modest little house. His father, a quiet man who worked at the local sawmill, had always been a distant figure in the community. Sam's mother was more involved but often found herself too busy with her own struggles to engage with others much. They were good people, but they didn't fit the town's ideal of the perfect family. Sam, too, was different. He wasn't the outgoing type. He was quiet, introverted, and often sat on the sidelines at events, watching rather than participating. He had a peculiar way of observing things, a deep sense of awareness about the world around him, even though he wasn't vocal about it. On the day of the wedding, Sam was dressed in a tiny suit that his mother had painstakingly picked out, hoping he would look like the well-behaved little boy everyone expected him to be. He was supposed to be the ring bearer, an important role, but Sam wasn't exactly thrilled by the attention. He had never liked being the center of things, and the thought of walking down the aisle in front of so many people made him feel uncomfortable. His palms were already sweating as he sat nervously in the pew at the back of the church. He could hear the laughter and chatter around him, the sound of the organ playing softly in the background, but it all felt distant. He could see the smiles on his relatives' faces, all dressed in their finest clothes, chatting amongst themselves, but Sam felt an odd sense of isolation, even though he was surrounded by family. He glanced at the front of the church, where Emma stood in her elegant wedding dress, glowing with happiness as she awaited her groom. Jake, standing beside her, looked every bit the part of the perfect groom. The couple's love story seemed flawless to everyone else. Sam had always admired Jake, though he never quite understood what made people love him so much. Maybe it was the way Jake had a knack for making people laugh, or the way he seemed to have everything together. Emma, too, was beautiful in every way. Sam, in his own quiet way, had always felt a small pang of envy toward them. They were the perfect couple, living the perfect life, or so it appeared. As Sam fidgeted in his seat, a part of him wished he could be as confident and happy as they seemed. But the unease he felt wasn't just because of the attention that came with being the ring bearer, it went deeper than that. Something inside him gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't quite put into words, but it had been building for weeks now. He had been hearing whispers, snippets of conversations from adults who didn't think he was paying attention. Some of the things they said didn't make sense, and others made his stomach turn. He had no idea how much he truly understood, but the unease in his chest kept growing. Sam wasn't sure what was about to happen, but he felt, deep down, that the day would not go as planned. Something was going to shift, and it would involve him, whether he was ready for it or not. He tried to push the feeling away as the wedding ceremony began. The doors closed behind him with a soft thud, and the light dimmed slightly, casting shadows on the faces of the guests. Sam couldn't help but glance at the people sitting around him. They were all so busy with their own excitement, lost in the moment, oblivious to whatever thoughts were occupying his mind. But there was something else. Something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air that Sam could feel, though it wasn't immediately obvious to anyone else. He kept hearing faint murmurs, but they were quickly hushed as the ceremony began. The organ played its opening notes, and the crowd fell silent. Sam's heartbeat quickened as the bride made her way down the aisle, her white dress a vision of grace and beauty. Sam, like the rest of the town, was entranced by the sight. But just before the vows were exchanged, something shifted in the atmosphere. The stillness of the church seemed to stretch, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. Sam felt a strange pressure on his chest. The moment was almost too perfect, too pristine, and it felt as though someone, was going to tear it all apart. What that something was, Sam didn't know, but as the ceremony progressed, his hand tightened around the small, velvet box in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly. This was the moment he had been waiting for. As the ceremony progressed, the atmosphere in the church grew increasingly tense, though it was almost imperceptible to those around Sam. He could feel it in the way the air seemed to thicken, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The soft murmur of the crowd faded into the background, drowned out by the pounding of his own heart. Sam sat rigidly, his eyes fixed on the altar, where Jake and Emma stood. For a moment, it seemed like everything would proceed smoothly, just as everyone had expected. The vows would be exchanged, the kiss would seal the union, and they would all head off to the reception to celebrate. But deep within him, Sam knew this was not going to be a normal wedding. Not today. He had been waiting for this moment for months, not out of excitement, but out of a sense of obligation. Sam wasn't exactly sure why he had been chosen as the ring bearer. He wasn't the most outgoing or well-known child in the family, and to be honest, he didn't particularly enjoy being the center of attention. But the adults in the family had insisted, and his mother had said it was important. "You're part of the family, Sam," she'd said, with a gentle smile, as if that was reason enough. Maybe it was. But Sam wasn't sure. He had always felt like an outsider in his own family, not quite fitting in with the others. He wasn't like his cousins, who were outgoing and full of energy, nor was he like his uncle's son, who was always so assured and confident. He was quiet, reflective, and prone to worrying. That day, however, something inside Sam felt different. He could feel a deep unease that he couldn't shake, and every passing moment only seemed to fuel it. As the vows were being exchanged, Sam looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the faces of the guests. Most of them were smiling, watching with adoration as Jake spoke his vows to Emma. Some whispered to each other, their voices barely audible above the soft music playing in the background. But then there was the occasional side eye or raised eyebrow, moments where someone's expression shifted slightly, as if they were unsure or uncertain about something. It was subtle, but Sam noticed it. It was as if some of the people in the room were anticipating something, though none of them could say exactly what. Sam couldn't help but feel that the guests knew, on some level, that the story being told that day was incomplete, that something was missing. Suddenly, he felt a sharp tug in his chest, as if a switch had been flipped. Sam's fingers twitched, and the small velvet box in his hand felt heavier than ever. He looked down at it, his mind racing. Inside, the wedding rings lay untouched, but Sam had already made up his mind. He had to act, even if he wasn't entirely sure why. There was no turning back now. The pressure building inside him was too much to ignore. Something was telling him that he needed to stop the wedding, that it was his responsibility to reveal the truth. He didn't fully understand why he felt that way, but it was as though some invisible force was pushing him toward this moment. Sam was no longer just a ring bearer, he was now an unwilling participant in a drama much bigger than he could have imagined. His palms were sweating as the bride and groom exchanged their vows. The words, so carefully chosen and spoken with emotion, seemed to hang in the air, but they felt distant to Sam. His mind was consumed with a different thought, one that refused to let go. He had to speak up, had to stop the ceremony, or else everything would go wrong. This wedding wasn't just about love, it was about secrets. Secrets that Sam had uncovered months ago, secrets that no one, not even Jake and Emma, knew about. It was time for the truth to come out. Without thinking, Sam stood up. The soft creak of the pew beneath him seemed deafening in the otherwise quiet church. Heads turned in his direction, and the murmur of the crowd grew louder. Sam's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short gasps. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, but he didn't care. His legs moved automatically, carrying him toward the front of the church, each step a battle against the growing panic inside him. The aisle seemed longer than he remembered, stretching out endlessly as he made his way toward the altar. When he reached the front, Sam stopped, the weight of the small velvet box in his hands almost unbearable. He looked up at Jake and Emma, their faces still glowing with happiness, oblivious to the storm about to break. Sam opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. His throat was dry, his voice caught somewhere deep inside him. The tension in the room was palpable now, and he could hear the confused whispers from the crowd, questioning what was happening, why the boy was standing there instead of performing his duty. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her disappointed look when he had told her about what he had learned. Sam had kept this secret for far too long, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. Not today. Finally, he spoke, his voice wavering but loud enough for the room to hear. "I have to tell you something," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. The room fell silent. Jake and Emma looked at him, confused, their smiles fading as they tried to process what was happening. The guests shifted uneasily in their seats, some standing up slightly to get a better view. I know something," Sam continued, his hands shaking. "I know about the truth." He paused, glancing at the guests, who were now fully focused on him. "About Jake," he added, his voice growing steadier. "About Emma." The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared to speak, and for a moment, Sam wasn't sure if anyone even believed him. But he had to finish what he started. The truth needed to come out, even if it shattered everything. "Jake he's not who you think he is," Sam blurted out. The shock that followed was immediate. The guests gasped, and Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. Jake looked as though he had been struck, his face paling as he turned to face Sam. But Sam didn't stop. He couldn't. The secret that had been eating away at him for months was now spilling out in front of everyone. He hadn't expected it to happen like this, but the moment had arrived. And Sam, despite his fear and uncertainty, was ready to face the consequences. The silence in the room stretched on, a heavy weight that seemed to press down on everyone. Sam could feel the heat of 1,000 eyes on him, but he didn't falter. He had to keep going, even though his hands trembled and his breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. He had no idea how he had gotten to this point, but now that the words were out, there was no turning back. Jake stood motionless, his face drained of color, as though the very foundation of his life was beginning to crack. Emma, too, seemed paralyzed, her gaze fixed on Sam as if she were trying to comprehend what was happening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, their lips trembling, unsure of what to say. The guests, who had been murmuring softly just moments before, were now completely still, waiting for the next word to come, but it didn't come immediately. Sam's mind was racing. He had never expected this kind of reaction, but deep down, he had known that this would shake things to their core. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, every beat echoing in his ears. His fingers still gripped the velvet box, though now it seemed almost insignificant in his hands. He wanted to shout, to make them understand, but the words stuck in his throat, and all he could do was stand there, staring at the faces around him. Emma finally broke the silence, her voice soft at first, as if testing the waters. "What, What are you talking about, Sam? Her words were shaky, her hands clenched tightly in front of her as if she were bracing for something terrible. Jake isn't who you think he is. What does that even mean? Sam swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Emma and Jake. There was a part of him that felt a pang of sympathy for them. They were about to have their world shattered, but it had to be done. He had seen enough, heard enough, to know that there was no way he could walk away from this. The truth had to come out. The night before the engagement, Sam said, his voice gaining strength with each word. I overheard something that I wasn't supposed to hear. He paused, glancing quickly around the room. Jake wasn't alone. He was with someone else. He could see the confusion on Emma's face, the way her brows furrowed as she tried to process what Sam was saying. But Sam couldn't stop now. There's someone else, Emma, Sam continued, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Jake's been seeing another woman. He's been hiding it from you, from everyone. The night before the proposal, he was with her. I saw them. Sam took a deep breath, his chest tightening with the pressure of the truth. You don't know her. You don't even know she exists. But I do. And now, you have to know. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emma's face paled, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, she simply stared at Sam, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find the words to respond. Jake, on the other hand, had gone completely still. His jaw clenched tightly, his fists slowly forming into balls at his sides. Sam could feel the anger radiating from him, but Sam didn't back down. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let fear stop him now. Sam, this isn't true, Jake finally said, his voice low and dangerously calm. You don't know what you're talking about. But even as he said it, his voice trembled, just enough for Sam to catch the crack in it. Jake took a step forward, but Sam held his ground. I saw you, Jake, Sam replied firmly. I saw you. You weren't just talking to her. You were kissing her. You were holding her hand. I didn't want to believe it at first. I didn't want to be the one to say anything. But I can't keep quiet anymore. The room erupted into chaos. Whispers flew through the crowd, some people gasping in shock, others muttering angrily under their breath. The tension in the air was thick, almost palpable. Emma stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her face had drained of color, and her legs seemed to give way beneath her as she collapsed into a nearby pew. Sam, why didn't you tell me sooner? Emma's voice was barely a whisper, filled with hurt and confusion. She looked at Jake, her eyes searching his face for an explanation, but there was none to be found. Why didn't you tell me? We were supposed to be getting married today. Jake's silence was the loudest answer. He couldn't speak. His guilt hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating everything around him. It was clear now. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. I didn't know what to do, Sam admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of it all. I didn't know if I should say anything. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. He paused, looking at Jake, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. But you can't keep living a lie. Not when everyone's counting on you. Not when Emma deserves the truth. Jake stood there, his face flushed with anger, his hands still clenched into fists. But the anger in his eyes was mixed with something else, something darker, something Sam couldn't quite name. Finally, Jake took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Sam's. You're a liar, Jake spat. You don't know anything. You're just a kid. You have no idea what you're talking about. His voice was a growl now, full of venom. But Sam stood his ground. He had heard the truth, and now he had spoken it. His heart still pounded in his chest, but he no longer felt afraid. He had come this far, and nothing could stop him now. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the soft sobs coming from Emma, who had her head in her hands, unable to process the full impact of the revelation. The wedding, which had once seemed so perfect, was now in ruins. What was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives had been turned upside down by a single truth. Sam glanced around the room, seeing the shocked faces of the guests, the tears in some eyes, the disbelief in others. They all knew now. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. The chaos in the church only deepened as the silence from Sam's revelation began to settle in. Emma, now trembling, stood up slowly from the pew, her eyes glassy with tears. She wiped her face with trembling hands, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just been revealed. The room, once filled with quiet anticipation and joy, was now thick with uncertainty and hurt. Sam stood frozen at the front of the church, unsure whether he had done the right thing or not. The weight of the truth seemed heavier than he ever imagined, and yet, despite the guilt that gnawed at his insides, there was an undeniable sense of relief in his chest. He had spoken the truth. The lie was out in the open, no matter the consequences. Jake, on the other hand, was a different story. His face was contorted with rage, his fists still clenched as he took a few steps forward. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as he faced Sam, the fury in his eyes unmistakable. For a moment, it seemed like the world had paused. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to respond, as the tension in the air was almost suffocating. The sound of a distant clock ticking seemed louder than ever. "You think you're some kind of hero, Sam?" Jake's voice was low and filled with venom. "You think telling lies in front of everyone is going to make you some big man? You're a kid. What do you know about love? About life?" He took another step forward, his voice rising in anger. "You've ruined everything. You've destroyed her life. You've destroyed my life." Sam's throat tightened, but he didn't back down. He had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, never wanted attention, but this wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about the secret he had uncovered. This was about the pain that everyone had been ignoring, the lies that had been hiding in plain sight for so long. He wasn't going to let anyone make him feel small now. "I didn't ruin anything," Sam said, his voice steady, but filled with raw emotion. "You did, Jake. You lied to her. You've been living a lie, and now it's out. No one can hide from the truth, not anymore." His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Jake to respond. For a long moment, there was silence again, the air thick with tension. Emma's face crumpled as she collapsed into the nearest pew, her sobs growing louder. The guests in the church stood in stunned silence, some with their hands over their mouths, others looking away in discomfort. No one seemed to know what to do, or if anything could be done to fix this broken moment. Finally, Jake spoke again, his voice now quieter, but laced with guilt. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt her. But things got out of hand." His eyes flicked to Emma, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I never meant to fall for someone else. I didn't plan for this, but it just happened." Emma looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his face for any sign of the man she had once trusted, the man she was supposed to marry. "How long, Jake?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" Her words were full of anguish, and it was clear that the love she had once felt for him was now shattered beyond repair. Jake's gaze shifted uneasily, his face reddening. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence between them was excruciating, and Emma's pain was palpable in the air. Finally, with a choked sob, she stood up, her hands wiping furiously at her eyes as if trying to erase the betrayal from her mind. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't do this anymore. I can't marry someone who's been lying to me." With that, Emma turned and rushed toward the church doors, her footsteps echoing down the aisle as she fled into the quiet of the outside world. Sam watched her go, his heart aching for her. He knew how much she had invested in this relationship, how much she had believed in the promise of the future they had all imagined. Now, everything was falling apart, and there was nothing Sam could do to fix it. He had brought the truth to light, but the consequences were far greater than he could have anticipated. Jake stood frozen, unable to move, as if the weight of everything was too much to bear. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, he collapsed into a nearby pew, his head in his hands, the full weight of his actions crashing down on him. For all his bravado, for all the lies he had told, the reality of the situation was now undeniable. He had lost her, lost everything, and there was no way to undo the damage. The guests in the church shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. The wedding was a distant memory now, replaced by a moment of raw, painful truth. Some of them stood up, quietly leaving the room, as if retreating from a scene they had no place in. Others remained seated, whispering among themselves, unsure of what to make of the drama that had unfolded before them. Sam stood there, unsure of what to do next. He had hoped, in some small part of his mind, that by revealing the truth, things would get better, that somehow, everything would make sense. But now, as the chaos unfolded around him, he realized the weight of what he had done. He had exposed the lie, but he had also set in motion a series of events that could never be undone. He had forced everyone to confront the truth, but at what cost? Outside the church, Emma stood alone, her back pressed against the cold stone wall, tears streaming down her face. The wind whipped around her, but she barely felt it. Her mind was a whirl of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. She had thought she knew Jake, had trusted him with her heart, but now that trust was gone, shattered by the lies he had told. How could he do this to her? How could he betray her in such a public, devastating way? As she wiped her eyes, trying to make sense of it all, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Sam had followed her out, his heart heavy with the knowledge that, despite his good intentions, everything was now in disarray. He didn't know what to say, but he couldn't leave her like this. "Emma," he began softly, his voice hesitant. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this to happen." She turned to him, her face etched with pain, and for a moment, their eyes locked. "You did the right thing, Sam," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to go on from here." Sam didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fix the pieces of this broken story. But he did know one thing: things would never be the same again. The truth had been exposed, and the aftermath was something they would all have to face. The world they had known was gone, replaced by a reality that was far more complicated. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, heartache, and endless questions. The small town that had once been a peaceful backdrop for Emma and Jake's love story now felt like a battleground. News of the scandal spread quickly, whispers in the grocery store, quiet conversations in cafes, and tense exchanges at the post office. Everyone knew what had happened, or at least they thought they did. The town was divided, some siding with Emma, others with Jake, but few could truly understand the emotional turmoil each of them was going through. Sam, in the aftermath of the revelation, found himself questioning his own role in all of this. He had set out to reveal the truth, thinking that exposing Jake's secret would somehow set things right, but the fallout had been more devastating than he could have ever imagined. He spent his days replaying the events over and over in his mind, wondering if there had been a better way to handle things, a way to save the relationships that had been torn apart. Every time he thought he had found the answer, the weight of what he had done settled heavier on his chest than they ever could have imagined. Emma, in the weeks that followed, had become a shell of her former self. She moved back in with her parents, her once vibrant smile now a distant memory. Her friends reached out, offering comfort, but the pain ran deeper than any words could heal. She had given everything to Jake, her trust, her love, her future, and now it felt like it had all been stolen from her in an instant. She didn't know how to move forward, didn't know how to heal. There were days when she found herself sitting by the window, staring out at the world as if it had no meaning anymore. The town, once so familiar and comforting, now seemed foreign, a place where she no longer belonged. But it wasn't just Jake and Emma who were affected. The community felt the ripples of the betrayal too. They had all watched as the young couple fell in love, as they had been the picture of what everyone hoped for, a perfect match, a perfect life. But now, with everything exposed, people started to ask questions. How could they have missed the signs? Had Jake's behavior always been a red flag? Had Emma seen something and ignored it? The town's sense of innocence had been shattered, and it wasn't just the people involved who were left picking up the pieces. Jake, for his part, disappeared for days after the wedding incident. He didn't show up at work, didn't answer calls or texts from his friends or family. It was as if the weight of his own lies had driven him into seclusion. The man who had once been the charming, popular guy everyone knew had now become a ghost, hiding from the world and from the mess he had created. Some of his friends tried to reach out, tried to convince him to face the consequences, but Jake couldn't bring himself to. He was lost in a fog of regret, too ashamed to face anyone, even himself. Then, after a week of silence, Jake finally returned to town. He showed up at his parents' house one evening, unshaven and gaunt, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He had a look about him, a man broken by his own choices. He sat down at the kitchen table, where his mother, who had always been a beacon of strength, looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and concern. The silence between them was thick, but eventually, Jake broke it. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I've messed everything up. I've hurt Emma in a way that I don't think I can fix. I've ruined my life. I don't even know who I am anymore." His mother, though heartbroken for him, didn't offer him the sympathy he expected. Instead, she looked him squarely in the eyes and said, "Jake, this isn't about you. This is about the people you hurt. The people you betrayed. You've got to face the music, son. You can't hide from this forever." Those words stayed with him, echoing in his mind in the days that followed. He couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't run from the reality he had created. His actions had consequences, and it was time to confront them. But how? What was he supposed to say to Emma? How could he apologize for something that seemed unforgivable? In the days after his return, Jake tried to reach out to Emma. He sent her messages, left voicemails, even showed up at her parents' house, but she refused to see him. The walls she had built around her heart were too strong now, and the trust she had once had in him was irreparably broken. He wrote her a letter, apologizing for everything, the lies, the betrayal, the pain he had caused. But even as he wrote it, he knew the words would never be enough. They could never undo what he had done. Sam, too, struggled with the aftermath. He had expected that revealing the truth would lead to some kind of resolution, either Emma and Jake would reconcile, or Jake would face the consequences of his actions. But instead, everything had become so much more complicated. He began to feel like an outsider in his own town, the boy who had shattered the illusion of perfection. He saw people whispering behind his back, judging him for his actions, even though he knew deep down that he had done the right thing. But in the eyes of some, there was no excusing the damage he had caused. No matter how much he tried to justify his decision, the guilt gnawed at him. As the months passed, the town began to heal, though it would never be the same. Jake eventually left town, unable to face the judgment, and started over somewhere else, though he carried the weight of his past with him. Emma, after a long period of grieving, slowly began to rebuild her life. It wasn't easy. There were days when she thought she might never get over the hurt. But in time, she found peace. She moved to a new town, started a new job, and met new people. She realized that she deserved more than what Jake had offered her, that she was worthy of a love built on trust, respect, and honesty. Sam, for his part, continued to live in the town that had seen his world crumble. He became closer to Emma, not out of guilt, but because they both understood the weight of the past. They both understood what it meant to lose something precious, to learn that sometimes, the truth hurts more than any lie ever could. But through it all, they both emerged stronger, more resilient. They learned that healing takes time, but it's possible to start over, no matter how broken you feel. Years later, when they both looked back on that fateful day, they realized that while the pain would always remain, it had shaped them into who they had become. They were no longer the people they had been before the lies, before the betrayal. They were better. They had grown. And in the end, that's all anyone can hope for, growth, even after the hardest of truths. As for the town, it too had moved on, but the story of Emma, Jake, and Sam was one that would be remembered for a long time. It served as a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, always finds its way to the surface. And when it does, everything changes. Years had passed since the devastating events in that small town, but the story of Emma, Jake, and Sam remained etched in the minds of the people who had witnessed it. It had become a cautionary tale whispered among families, a story passed down to children as a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that secrets, no matter how well hidden, would eventually come to light. But for the three of them, the echoes of that day were far from over. Life had moved on, but the shadows of the past lingered in ways they never expected. Emma had come a long way since that tragic wedding day. She had built a new life for herself, one that no longer involved Jake or the painful memories of what he had done. Her new town, a small but vibrant city not far from where she grew up, had embraced her in ways her old one never had. She had found a new job, met new friends, and, slowly, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was still something worth hoping for. Her heart was no longer bound by the betrayal, though at times, she found herself missing the girl she used to be, the girl who believed in fairy tales, in happily ever afters. But there were still days when the memories came flooding back, uninvited, to remind her of everything she had lost. She'd sometimes walk past a park bench or a coffee shop and be hit with a pang of longing for the life she thought she was going to have. She still thought of Jake, though rarely with love. Now, it was more with an aching sense of what might have been, had he been the person she thought he was. She would never forget the pain, but in time, she had learned to forgive. Not for him, but for herself. Holding on to the anger had only held her back from living the life she deserved. One evening, while browsing through a local bookstore, she bumped into someone unexpected. It was Sam. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the day of the wedding when everything had fallen apart. At first, they simply stared at each other in silence. Sam's once quiet and reserved demeanor had changed over the years. He was no longer the boy who had stood in the background, unsure of his place. He was a man now, still carrying the weight of the choices he had made, but there was a kind of peace in his eyes, something that hadn't been there when he had first revealed the truth. After a long, awkward pause, Sam spoke first. Emma, his voice was hesitant, but there was a sincerity there that she hadn't expected. It's been a while. She nodded, unsure of what to say. Part of her wanted to walk away and never look back, to avoid the painful memories that seeing Sam brought with him. But another part of her felt a strange curiosity, a desire to understand the person who had set everything in motion. Yeah. It's been a long time. There was a silence between them, the weight of the past hanging heavily in the air. Emma realized that, despite everything, she had never really thanked Sam for what he had done. He had exposed the truth, yes, but it had been the only way to untangle the mess that had been her life. Jake's lies had bound her, and Sam had given her the chance to break free, even if it came at a tremendous cost. I don't know if I ever thanked you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. For what you did. For revealing the truth. Sam looked down, his face flushing with guilt. I don't deserve any thanks. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I couldn't watch you go through with it. I thought the truth would set things right. Emma gave him a soft smile, the kind of smile that wasn't about forgiveness or regret, but about understanding. It did, in the end. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to face, but it did set things right. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't said anything. Maybe we would have stayed in that life forever. They stood there for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not in the way that people expected it to be. It was more like a mutual recognition of the way life had unfolded. They had both been hurt, but they had both grown because of it. After a few more moments of awkward silence, Sam cleared his throat. How have you been? Really? Emma hesitated before answering. She had never really shared the depths of her struggles with anyone, especially not Sam. She had always carried the weight of the pain alone, afraid that others would judge her for how long it had taken her to heal. But something about this moment, something about Sam's genuine concern, made her open up. I've been okay. It's been tough. There were days when I didn't know if I could move forward. But I'm getting there. I'm building something new. Sam nodded, a look of relief on his face. I'm glad to hear that. I always hoped you would. You deserve to be happy. Emma smiled again, this time more warmly. I'm getting there, she repeated. And you? How about you? Sam shifted uneasily, but his smile was genuine. It's been a long road, honestly. I think I was running from the consequences for a while, but now I'm starting to understand that you can't escape your past. I had to face it head-on. I lost a lot, but I think I'm better for it. I've learned a lot about myself, about how to be a better person. She could see it in him, the change, the growth. The boy who had stood in the shadows was gone, replaced by someone who had accepted their mistakes and was trying to be better. There was something healing about seeing that, something that made Emma feel that perhaps, in their own ways, they were both moving on from the past. I'm glad, she said, her voice soft. I hope you keep growing. Sam's eyes softened. I will. I won't ever be perfect, but I'm trying to be better. They stood there for a moment longer, the tension of years past finally lifting, replaced by something that felt like peace. Eventually, they said their goodbyes, and Emma left the bookstore, feeling lighter than she had in years. It wasn't that everything was magically fixed. There was still pain, still heartbreak, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of closure. Life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges at you, but it also had a way of helping you heal, even when it seemed impossible. The past would always be a part of her, but she was ready to move forward. She had learned that, sometimes, the hardest battles were the ones we fought within ourselves. As for Jake, he remained a ghost in the town, a shadow of the man he had been. He had tried to rebuild his life elsewhere, but the truth always followed him, like a lingering fog. He had lost everything that mattered, and no amount of time or distance could erase the hurt he had caused. In the end, Jake was a man marked by his choices, a man who would forever carry the consequences of his actions. But Emma and Sam, they were different. They had been through the fire, and though they were scarred, they were stronger for it. Life had broken them both, but it had also forged something new, something more resilient, something that could look forward without being weighed down by the past. And that, Emma realized, was what mattered most. The past was gone. The truth had been revealed. And now, it was time for them all to move forward, in their own ways, towards the future they could still shape.